Hello, and welcome to Echoes of the Forgotten Earth, where curiosity pulls up a blanket and science lowers its voice like a lamp turned down low. Tonight I'm going to take you somewhere so far back it almost stops feeling like back at all. Not a chapter, not a footnote. The opening breath of our world, when Earth, our familiar warm stone in the dark, was still only a possibility in motion. Have you ever wondered what existed before mountains had names? Before oceans knew how to hold a coastline? Before the sky learned the color blue and trees figured out green? Try to picture looking down at your feet and realizing the ground under you once began as heat and grit and star ash, a bright anger of metal and rock still learning how to be solid. It's strange, isn't it, to think the same planet that holds your porch steps, your keys, your pets, your bed once didn't exist at all. And then, somehow, it did. But before we start shaping worlds out of chaos, I have to ask, where are you listening from tonight? What city? What shoreline? What quiet room? And what time is it in your particular pocket of the universe early evening? Midnight. The soft hours before dawn. If this slow unspooling of ancient mysteries brings you even a whisper of calm, I'd be quietly grateful if you offered a like, maybe subscribed, maybe shared this with someone else who needs a gentle science story at the end of a long day. It helps this small corner of quiet reach others who are also trying to rest their minds without turning them off. So settle in. Let your thoughts loosen their grip. Let the day slip away from your shoulders. Because before there were birds or buildings or bedtime stories, there was only dust drifting through silence. And from it, somehow, Earth was born. Around 4.5 billion years ago, give or take a few cosmic blinks, something extraordinary happened in the unsettled swirl of a young solar system. A violent ballet of collisions, gravity, molten stone, and time gave rise to the planet you're on right now. The ground we take for granted is older than memory, older than bones, older than time zones and tea kettles, and yet Earth's story is still unfolding, and we're only just learning how its first lines were written. Sometimes, to understand something ancient, you have to notice something strange in the present. In the late 1960s, a group of geologists working in Western Australia noticed something that felt wrong in the best possible way. In the dry red heart of that continent, tucked inside ancient rock, were smooth, rounded pebbles, softly worn, as if water had rolled them over and over, the way rivers do when they have all the time in the world. But the rock that held them was nearly 3.5 billion years old, pebbles that shouldn't have been there. How could there have been rivers back then? Was there even land to carve? Even oceans to feed them? Could Earth have already known flowing water while life, as we recognize it, hadn't even begun to blink? That small mystery, the shape of a stone split, open a larger question, one that would take decades of arguments, field work, lab tests, satellite scans, and an unromantic amount of mud baked onto boots. What was early Earth actually like? What would it feel like to stand on it if you could? And where, exactly, did it come from? Now come forward with me to a laboratory in California. The light is clean and bright. The kind of light that makes every grain of dust look guilty. A scientist leans over a sample, studying tiny grains trapped inside a piece of zircon, a mineral that forms in molten rock and keeps secrets the way crystal keeps a diary, sealed and stubborn. She measures the isotopes inside, watching how uranium decays into lead, a clock not made for seconds but for epochs. And in a grain no larger than a fleck of dust, she finds something astonishing. Earth was already making crust. Solid ground. Just 160 million years after the solar system itself began. That's fast. Cosmically speaking, Earth wasted no time becoming Earth. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Let's step back. Picture the solar system before it was a system. No planets, no moons, no tidy orbits turning like slow wheels around the sun. Just a vast, spinning cloud of gas and dust. The leftovers of older stars that had lived, burned, exploded, and scattered their ashes across space. That cloud, a solar nebula, was immense, and slowly, gently, inexorably, Gravity began pulling it inward. As it collapsed, it spun faster like a figure skater drawing in her arms. In the center, heat built until hydrogen atoms fused and lit the sun's first fire. Around that newborn star, the leftover material flattened into a disk, a broad, dim ring of possibility. Imagine a ring of microscopic grains drifting in spirals like flour caught in a sunbeam. Dust clung to dust, becoming pebbles. Pebbles gathered into boulders. Boulders slammed together into planetesimals, baby planets tumbling and crashing through space like cosmic toddlers, learning balance the hard way. It was not gentle. It was loud and hot and violent. But out of that violence, order began to show its shape. Earth was born not as a calm marble, not as a quiet blue dot. It arrived as a glowing sphere of molten rock. Its surface churned with lava and impact after impact. Some collisions were the size of mountains, others were the size of Mars. Yes, Mars. Because not long after Earth took shape, it had a visitor. A rogue world, likely about the size of our red neighbor, collided with early Earth at just the right angle and speed. It didn't destroy the planet. Instead, it tore away a massive chunk of material, vaporized rock, and molten metal flung into orbit, spinning out like sparks from a grinder. And from that debris, the moon was born, a child of collision, raised by gravity. We know this not just because it sounds right, but because rocks insist on telling the truth. The moon's composition is eerily similar to Earth's outer layers, its orbit, its size, even Earth's strange axial tilt. Those are fingerprints left by an ancient impact. This event is often called the Theia collision, named after the mythical mother of the moon. It didn't only make our satellite, it reshaped Earth itself. It may have stripped away a heavy early atmosphere. It likely sped up Earth's spin. And it certainly left behind a glowing, molten planet that now had to do the slow work of cooling. So how do we know all this? Mostly from rock's patient witnesses that don't forget. Some of the oldest rocks on Earth are found in Canada, Greenland, and Australia, places where ancient continental crust peeks out from beneath younger layers like old volumes in a library you didn't realize existed. They whisper in isotopes and mineral grains, in oxygen ratios and lead decay. They speak of a world without trees, without animals, without even stable land, a world of fire, storms, and endless bombardment from space. And then, suddenly water. No one knows exactly when or how the oceans arrived. Some imagine comets, icy bodies from the outer solar system, delivering water in violent crashes. Others point to volcanic outgassing, the idea that early Earth's interior held water, and slowly exhaled it through eruptions, clouds, and eventually rain. Either way, at some point the sky began to darken. The steam cooled, and it rained, and rained, and rained. For millions of years, early Earth may have been wrapped in storms so vast and unrelenting that the surface became oceanic. Not islands in a sea, but seas with no islands. We don't know how long this ocean world lasted. Some suggest volcanic protocontinents, patches of rock rising above waves like the first shy thoughts of land. Others believe the planet was almost entirely submerged, but eventually tectonics began to stir. Plates shifted, continents gathered, and Earth, still unrecognizable to anything we'd call home, began to take form. What makes this even more remarkable is how much we've learned from tiny hints. A zircon grain, a rounded pebble in an ancient rock bed, a subtle wobble in the moon's orbit. Science doesn't always leap. More often it steps softly, squints closely, and listens to stone. One such stone traveled a long way to tell its part of the story. A geologist named Harrison Schmitt, the only geologist to ever walk on the moon, brought back lunar samples during Apollo 17 material that helped strengthen the Theia impact theory. And back on Earth, researchers noticed something quietly astonishing in that lunar soil. It contained pieces of Earth itself, blown into space during the collision, and preserved on the moon, where erosion and tectonics never reached. In a way, the moon became a museum of Earth's forgotten youth. Other clues come from the magnetic field deep beneath our feet. Earth has a liquid iron core that spins and churns, generating a magnetic field that shields us from solar wind and cosmic radiation. But that core had to form somehow. As the young Earth cooled, heavy elements like iron and nickel sank toward the center, creating a layered planet: core, mantle, crust. This process differentiation gave us structure, yes, but also a magnetic umbrella that helps protect our atmosphere and, by extension, life. We can trace echoes of this formation in meteorites, too. Certain iron-rich meteorites are believed to come from the shattered cores of early protoplanets that never made it to full planet status. Studying them is like holding a piece of Earth's interior preserved in space since the dawn of the solar system. And speaking of life, while Earth's formation was violent, it laid the groundwork for everything to come. A stable crust, water, a protective magnetic field, the gentle tug of the moon steadying Earth's tilt and seasons. None of this was guaranteed. Earth could have been too small to hold an atmosphere. It could have spun too fast or too slow. It might never have been hit by Theia, or could have been hit again, shattered, scattered, erased. Yet here we are, 4.5 billion years later, listening. And it all started with dust. Try just for a moment to imagine Earth before anyone ever looked at it. No trees, no birds, no green, no blue. A world without color. At least not the colors we associate with calm meadows and painted skies. In those first few 100 million years, Earth was still deciding what kind of planet it wanted to be. It had a surface, yes, but it was raw, blistered, and constantly changing the kind of terrain that seemed to simmer with impatience. Picture molten rock cooling into jagged crust, only to be broken apart by new impacts, fresh lava flows, and endless tectonic rearrangements. Volcanoes didn't sit politely in mountain chains. They erupted from cracks like Earth itself was still exhaling the heat of its birth. The sky wasn't blue, not yet. It probably wasn't any color in the way we'd recognize. Some models suggest it may have been red or orange, thick with carbon dioxide and methane, cloaked in volcanic smog and swirling steam from the forming oceans. Imagine standing on a volcanic shoreline, if such a thing could be stood upon. Sulfur in the air, the sun, a dim filtered glow behind churning clouds. And yet it rained. Not like we know rain. Not the gentle drizzle, not the afternoon shower. Early Earth's atmosphere was dense and unstable, swollen with vapor. When it cooled enough for condensation, it poured storm after storm after storm. It might have rained for centuries at a time. Whole epochs defined not by geology, but by weather. Beneath those endless clouds, oceans began to form. Salty, yes, but not the salt you think of. They were acidic, heavy with dissolved minerals leached from young crust, stirred by tides from the newly born moon and waves thrown up by constant asteroid impacts. If the planet ever calmed, it didn't stay calm for long. And below the waves, something extraordinary was happening. Deep beneath the surface, where light could not reach and pressure was immense, Earth's heat bubbled up through hydrothermal vents cracks in the seafloor where hot, mineral-rich water gushed into the ocean. It's there many scientists believe the first whispers of life may have stirred, not with a bang, but with chemistry. Simple molecules reacting with metals, temperature and time building complexity slowly, until something could replicate. And from that, everything else. But even before life, Earth was already in restless transformation. Plate tectonics had begun. Maybe not exactly as it works today, but the idea was there. Slabs of crust drifting atop the pliable mantle, colliding, diving beneath one another, splitting open new oceans and crushing proto-continents into mountains. And with that movement came change. Islands formed and sank. New minerals surfaced, gases were released or absorbed. Every crack and shift rewrote the atmosphere and ocean chemistry just slightly. And Earth kept cooling, slowly, steadily, reluctantly, inch by inch away from molten beginnings towards something more stable, Some of the earliest rocks we still have come from that time, though they're rare and weathered like nearly forgotten memories. The Acasta gneiss in Canada dates back over 4 billion years. It isn't just old. It's a time capsule, a piece of crust that somehow avoided being melted, crushed, or recycled in the great tectonic churn. When geologists hold it, they're holding the crustal memory of a planet that had only just learned how to be solid. Not far behind are the zircons, tiny crystals from the Jack Hills of Western Australia, older than any rock, formed in molten environments and carried forward through billions of years inside younger stone. From their isotopes, we've learned something almost unbelievable. Liquid water may have existed on Earth just 150 million years after it formed. That is shockingly early, astonishingly lucky. But luck, in science, often just means the right conditions held on long enough to matter. And Earth, despite its violent youth, had a few ingredients that helped it keep those conditions. First, its size. Not too small like Mars, which lost most of its atmosphere, and not too large like the gas giants, which never formed a solid surface at all. Earth was just right, big enough to hold an atmosphere, small enough not to become a star. It had a molten iron core, and a magnetic field strong enough to deflect solar wind and protect the young atmosphere from being stripped away. Then there was the moon born from chaos, essential to stability. Its gravity slowed Earth's spin and helped keep the planet's axis from wobbling wildly. That steadiness meant more consistent seasons, something that would eventually matter deeply to life. And there was distance from the sun, not too hot, not too cold. The so-called Goldilocks zone is often romanticized, but it's simply crucial. It allowed liquid water to persist, not boil away, not freeze forever. Water slippery, shape-shifting became Earth's first great sculptor, carving valleys, dissolving minerals, transporting nutrients, and maybe, just maybe, coaxing the first spark of life into being. At some point, we don't know exactly when, Earth crossed a boundary, from a world of chemistry into a world of biology. The first cells likely formed near deep-sea vents or in warm, mineral-rich surface pools. They were simple, without nuclei, without complex organelles, but they could replicate, they could evolve. They could, in the most primitive sense, live. The world they lived in would feel alien to us. The oceans were greenish and murky, rich with dissolved iron. The sky lacked oxygen and had no ozone layer, letting harsh radiation reach the surface. Life clung to shadows, depths, sheltered places. It didn't breathe the way we do. Oxygen was toxic, something to avoid. And yet, life endured. Stromatolites' layered structures built by microbial mats began to appear. Their living descendants still exist in a few remote places, like Shark Bay in Australia. But their ancestors were pioneers, capturing sunlight through early photosynthesis, releasing oxygen as a byproduct over immense spans of time. They didn't intend to change the world, but they did. It took hundreds of millions of years for oxygen to accumulate. At first, it rusted the oceans, turning dissolved iron into solid oxides that sank to the seafloor. We still see the evidence in banded iron formations striking red and black layers in ancient rock that tell of oceans bleeding rust. Only after the oceans had soaked up enough oxygen did it begin to build in the atmosphere. And when it did, it triggered one of the greatest transformations in Earth's history, the Great Oxygenation Event. But that, yes, that is another story for another night. For now, let's linger here a little longer, in this ancient world that hadn't yet heard thunder the way we know it, or bird song, or the crunch of leaves underfoot. A world of simmering seas and restless crust, of chemical whispers and volcanic roars. A place where the sky was strange, the air unbreathable, the land barely land at all. And yet Earth was already beautiful. Not soft beauty, no meadows, no flowers, but raw beauty, honest beauty, power without apology. This was a world still becoming, still inventing itself, and we are its children. Every cell in our bodies carries traces of that early world. Elements forged in stars, minerals birthed in lava, water older than the moon. We are descendants not only of life, but of the planet itself, shaped by it, sustained by it. And in quiet moments, when we listen closely, we can almost hear it still. The sigh of ancient oceans, the hum of shifting plates, the deep, slow pulse of a planet that has been alive in its own way since before life began. Change on Earth has rarely arrived politely. It doesn't knock. It doesn't wait. It explodes. It crashes. It overwhelms, sometimes in minutes, sometimes over millennia. But Earth changes. It always has. And perhaps no change was more dramatic, more sweeping, or more quietly lethal than the arrival of a gas we now call life-giving. Oxygen. Change on Earth has rarely arrived politely. It doesn't knock. It doesn't wait. It explodes. It crashes. It overwhelms, sometimes in minutes, sometimes over millennia. But the planet changes. It always has. And perhaps no change was more dramatic, more sweeping, or more quietly lethal than the arrival of a gas we now call life-giving. Oxygen. If you stepped outside tonight and took a breath, you'd be drawing in air that's about 21% oxygen, the fuel our cells burn, the invisible helper behind every thought and heartbeat, the ingredient that lets fires flare. But in the early story of Earth, oxygen wasn't comfort. It was a stranger, a troublemaker, a slow poison drifting in, molecule by molecule, changing the rules of survival without announcing itself. Before oxygen became common, Earth's atmosphere looked nothing like what we know. It was thick with methane, carbon dioxide, water vapor, and traces of ammonia and hydrogen, a cocktail suited for a world without complex animals or forests. Many early microbes had adapted beautifully to it. They thrived in low oxygen places, deep oceans, sediments, hot springs, microbial mats. They were anaerobic, living without oxygen, and in many cases, harmed by it. Then came photosynthesis. Not the kind we picture in classrooms, leafy plants and neat diagrams and smiling suns, but a simpler, older version practiced by ancient bacteria. Most likely cyanobacteria, often called blue-green algae, though they aren't algae at all. Tiny beings in shallow seas, soaking in sunlight, turning carbon dioxide and water into energy, and exhaling oxygen as waste. At first, that oxygen didn't travel far. It reacted quickly with what the oceans held in abundance: dissolved iron. Oxygen grabbed the iron and made iron oxide rust. Layer after layer, year after year, rust fell through the water and settled into sediments. Over immense time, those sediments became banded iron formations, red and dark striped rocks found in places like Australia and South Africa, geological fingerprints of a planet changing quietly, one molecule at a time. But rust has a limit. Eventually, the oceans could no longer absorb all the oxygen being produced. There wasn't enough dissolved iron left to soak it up, and so oxygen began to accumulate first in the oceans, then leaking into the atmosphere. A slow leak at first, tentative but relentless. Scientists call this turning point the Great Oxygenation Event, often shortened to GOE. It began around 2.4 billion years ago, though the details are still argued over in labs and at conferences and in the fine print of papers. Why did oxygen rise when it did? Some researchers suggest tectonic activity shifted, reducing volcanic gases that previously gobbled up free oxygen. Others argue that growing continents created more shallow water environments where photosynthetic microbes could bloom. Whatever the trigger, the effect was profound. Because oxygen didn't just arrive, it spread. And as it spread, it triggered a silent apocalypse. For anaerobic microbes, oxygen was toxic. It damaged proteins, fractured DNA, wrecked the delicate chemistry that kept their cells intact. Entire ecosystems collapsed. Vast microbial communities that had dominated Earth for ages died out or retreated to places where oxygen couldn't follow. Deep sediments, hydrothermal vents, hidden pockets of chemical refuge. In a real sense, this was Earth's first mass extinction. But extinction and innovation share the same breath. Oxygen, lethal to some, was miraculous to others. It allows far more efficient energy production. With oxygen, cells can make more ATP, the currency of biological energy, out of the same food. That surplus is what eventually makes complexity possible. Larger bodies, faster movement, more elaborate cellular machinery, but not right away. Earth doesn't flip a switch and become modern. It staggers, it experiments, it overshoots and corrects. After the GOE, Earth may have entered one of its coldest, bleakest chapters. With methane levels falling, methane being one of Earth's strongest early greenhouse gases, planetary warmth leaked away. Carbon dioxide chemistry shifted, sunlight reflected off expanding ice and newly exposed land. The world cooled. Ice spread. Some scientists believe Earth may have slipped into an early version of Snowball Earth, a near global glaciation, ice reaching toward the equator. Life did not vanish, but it quieted, hidden beneath ice, or sheltered near geothermal heat, waiting in the dark for conditions to loosen their grip. And still, oxygen persisted. The skies began to change. Before the GOE, the atmosphere may have carried a haze-orange or pinkish tone suggested by methane and organic gases. But as oxygen accumulated, it enabled the formation of ozone O3, 3 oxygen atoms bound together. Ozone gathered high above the surface into a layer that began blocking ultraviolet radiation, a planetary sunscreen. For the first time, life had a little more protection. For the first time, the surface became less hostile. Not friendly, just less deadly. It's strange to think a gas could be a trigger. Not an asteroid, not a volcano, not a continent cracking open, just a molecule, invisible and quiet. And yet, oxygen didn't only reshape biology. It altered the chemistry of oceans, the colors of rocks, the cycling of elements. It set the stage for everything that came after animals, forests, mines, cities. A planetary reset disguised as air. And it wouldn't be the last time Earth reinvented itself. Of course, not every transformation arrived in the form of an invisible gas. Some came roaring up from below, loud enough to rewrite the living world with fire. About 252 million years ago, long after oxygen's dramatic debut, Earth experienced another kind of change. Not slow, not subtle, but ash and heat and fury. This was the time of the Great Dying, the end Permian extinction, the most severe mass extinction known in Earth's history. It began in what is now Siberia, where a colossal volcanic event unfolded across an area larger than Western Europe. For hundreds of thousands of years, lava poured out in waves flood basalts, stacking in layers hundreds of meters thick. It wasn't a single eruption, it was a province of eruptions, the Siberian Traps. They released carbon dioxide, methane, sulfur dioxide, and more into the air for millennia. The result was chaos. Temperatures climbed, oceans acidified, anoxic zones regions of water with little or no oxygen spread. Food chains collapsed from the base upward. More than 90% of marine species vanished. Around 70% of land species disappeared. Forests died, insects dwindled, reefs collapsed into silence. For a time, Earth was nearly uninhabitable. We know this not because the planet kept a written record, but because rock layers remember. Ash beds, charcoal, fossil records that suddenly go quiet. Sharp shifts in carbon isotopes. The evidence doesn't come as one dramatic object you can hold in your palm. It comes as patterns, as absences, as chemical fingerprints spread across continents. Extinction isn't always a single strike. Sometimes it's a cascade. Warming leads to melting. Melting releases methane. Methane drives more warming. Oceans lose oxygen. Microbes bloom. Chemistry shifts. The planet doesn't change in one way. It changes in many at once. And still, even as Earth suffers, it survives. Because out of the ruins of the Permian collapse rose new life. The ancestors of dinosaurs, early mammals, the beginnings of reef systems that would later flourish. Change is cruel, yes, but it is also creative. The planet moves forward, always. Later, about 66 million years ago, another event shattered the world. This one not from below, but from above. A rock roughly 10 kilometers wide, traveling faster than sound, slammed into what is now the Yucatan Peninsula. The impact released energy equivalent to billions of atomic bombs. It vaporized everything near the strike. It ignited global wildfires. It flung dust and sulfur high into the sky, blotting out sunlight. Photosynthesis stalled, temperatures dropped, food webs collapsed. The dinosaurs, rulers of land, sea, and air, did not survive. But mammals did. And among their distant descendants would eventually come the strange creatures who split atoms, build telescopes, and tell bedtime stories about ancient rocks and silent oceans. We are still refining the details of that impact. We find shocked quartz in rock layers around the world, minerals fractured by immense pressure. We find a thin band of iridium-rich clay, iridium being rare in Earth's crust but common in asteroids. We can even point to the crater itself, Chicxulub, a buried scar beneath Mexico, visible through gravity maps and seismic imaging. Each of these events, oxygenation, volcanism, impact, was a different kind of trigger. Each changed the trajectory of life. Each left scars that became stories. And each reminds us that Earth's history isn't a smooth timeline. It's a symphony of catastrophes and recoveries. The planet doesn't simply age. It reinvents itself again and again. And always, somewhere, something survives. One cell, one spore, one seed buried beneath ash. Earth teaches us that even the worst day can be a beginning in disguise. Change never arrives alone. It comes with echoes, aftershocks, dominoes falling in directions no one could fully predict. One shift sets off another and another, until the world that was becomes the world that is, often without a clear moment where you can point and say, here is where it turned. So when oxygen rose, it didn't just disrupt microbes or rust the seas, it reshaped the chemistry of the planet. Iron vanished from the oceans into sediments. Sulfur cycles shifted. Methane, a powerful greenhouse gas, was broken down in the atmosphere by oxygen and ultraviolet light. As methane fell, the temperature followed. The greenhouse blanket thinned, heat escaped, and then dramatically Earth froze. This was no ordinary winter. Around 720 million years ago, ice began creeping from the poles. It advanced not the way we think of glaciers today, but rapidly, relentlessly, swallowing oceans and burying continents. Within a few million years, geologically the blink of an eye, the planet may have been encased in ice from pole to pole. Tropical seas, frozen, equatorial waters, sealed beneath miles of snow. From orbit, a pale pearl, smooth and silent. But beneath that icy shell, life held on. In cracks within the ice, in pockets of liquid water, around hydrothermal vents, buried in sediments. Extremophiles, the champions of persistence, continued their slow chemistry. Not thriving, perhaps, but surviving, because survival was the only option left. And above them, beneath the ice, carbon dioxide still emitted from volcanoes, but with the surface locked under ice, much of that CO2 couldn't cycle the way it usually would. It accumulated. Century by century, pressure built a silent carbon countdown until a tipping point arrived. The greenhouse effect returned. The world thawed, but not gently. Temperatures surged, ice broke apart, glaciers melted, oceans rose. Weather snapped back into motion with force. Storms tore through the atmosphere. Coastlines were redrawn. Earth was transformed again, not by a single blow, but by a pressure that had been building patiently in the dark. This cycle of freeze and flood didn't just rearrange the map, it stirred evolution. In the aftermath, life rebounded not only in abundance but in complexity. Multicellular organisms, once small, tentative experiments began to diversify, New body plans, new behaviors, new possibilities. Some scientists think these ice ages acted like evolutionary bottlenecks, squeezing life through narrow corridors where only the most adaptable could pass. And on the other side, evolution spread into the open space like a river finding new channels. It wouldn't be the last time catastrophe gave birth to creativity. And when you look back across the long record Permian firestorms, asteroid winters, snowball silences, you begin to see the pattern. Earth is sensitive, interwoven, a system of systems. Volcanoes influence the sky alters the sea shapes life, and life in turn changes the air. We draw lines between disciplines: geology, chemistry, biology, climate science, because it helps our minds organize the world. But Earth doesn't recognize those lines. Earth works as one. Earth works as one. And that interconnectedness isn't just ancient, it's present tense, right now. We are living inside the same kind of system that once turned oceans to rust and skies to ozone, that once froze the planet into a bright white hush, and then thawed it with a feverish surge. The difference is that we can watch it happening. We can measure, we can model, we can name the pattern while it's still unfolding. Scientists call what we're entering the 6th mass extinction. Not because a single day will arrive where everything ends, but because the rate of disappearance species slipping away, ecosystems unraveling, has begun to resemble the great collapses of the past. This one isn't triggered by a flood basalt province or a rogue asteroid. It's triggered by us. Habitat loss, pollution, invasive species, and above all, climate change driven by greenhouse gas emissions. The same carbon that once rose from fissures in Siberia now rises from engines and chimneys. The same feedback loops are waking again. Warming melts permafrost. Permafrost releases methane. Methane causes more warming. Forests die and burn, releasing carbon. Oceans absorb CO2, acidify and disrupt marine life. It's familiar, not because we've lived it before, but because Earth has. And the pace matters. Some ancient warmings unfolded over thousands of years. This one is racing forward on a human schedule faster than many forests can migrate, faster than coral reefs can adjust, faster than countless species can evolve their way out of trouble. But unlike past events, this one isn't written in stone yet. Not fully. Because the trigger isn't mindless. It's choices. It's industry. It's speed. And that means the cascade can still be softened, the sharpest edges blunted, the fall slowed enough for living systems to adapt. We don't yet know how this chapter ends. But we do know what the past teaches when you read it carefully. Earth always changes, and when it does, consequences ripple through rock, air, water, and life. And those ripples last not for decades, but for ages. The thing about Earth is that it remembers. Not like we remember, not with calendars or photographs or careful journals. Earth remembers in layers and strata, in fossils pressed like whispers into stone, in isotopes, trace metals, mineral grains no bigger than dust. The planet carries memory in its bones. And if you learn to read those bones, you begin to see patterns: extinction, upheaval, rhythm, return. Because what we think of as stability, forests rising, oceans staying put, seasons following a polite schedule, that's the exception. The pause, the inhale before the next great shift. Long before dinosaurs vanished in a storm of fire and dust, long before trilobites scuttled through Cambrian seas, there were other resets. Some were so total, they nearly erased the story of life. Others were quieter, like a slow unraveling species disappearing one by one, until whole ecosystems gave way to something new. Take the Ordovician extinction, for instance, around 443 million years ago. Earth was a different place then. Most life lived in the oceans. Continents were scattered and bare. Land plants were only beginning to test mossy footholds. And then temperatures fell. Glaciers advanced. Sea levels dropped. The shallow marine habitats where most species lived vanished almost overnight. What triggered it? Scientists debate. Some point to mountain building that exposed fresh rock to weathering, pulling carbon dioxide from the air and cooling the planet. Others suggest shifts in ocean currents or subtle changes in solar output. Whatever the cause, the result was a freeze, then a flood. When the ice melted, sea levels rose again, climate swung, and life that couldn't adapt suffered. More than 80% of marine species disappeared. We see it in rock. The sudden disappearance of graptolites, shifts in conodont fossils, layers rich with glacial debris followed by deep black shales, evidence of low oxygen seas, struggling back toward recovery. Then came the Devonian extinction, starting around 370 million years ago. This one wasn't a single blow. It came in pulses, stretched over millions of years, an unraveling rather than an explosion. Reef-building organisms suffered. Armored fish declined, early ammonites faded. Why? Again, the arguments braid together. Some researchers point to the rise of land plants. As roots spread, they broke down rock and released nutrients into rivers. The nutrients poured into oceans, causing algal blooms. The blooms died, sank, and rotted, sucking oxygen out of the water. Toxic, breathless seas spread. Others point to volcanic activity. Some suggest impacts. And often, the truth is messy. Extinction rarely has one clean culprit. It's a system event. One element knocks into the next. Nutrient cycles, ocean circulation, temperature, photosynthesis, predation, everything connected. Then the greatest collapse of all, the end Permian. The great dying volcanoes, methane, heat, anoxic oceans, the cliff in the fossil record. And even that was not the end. Because just about 50 million years later, Earth did it again. The end Triassic extinction. This time, the culprit was another massive flood basalt event, the Central Atlantic magmatic province erupting as the supercontinent Pangaea began to split. As the Atlantic Ocean started to open, magma surged through faults and fractures. The gases warmed the planet, acidified oceans, and pushed many species, especially marine ones, over the edge. Yet among the survivors were early dinosaurs and small mammals waiting in the margins. And then, of course, the one we know best. The end Cretaceous extinction 66 million years ago. The asteroid winter that ended non-avian dinosaurs and changed the direction of life. 5 major mass extinctions. 5 deep scars. But they weren't alone. Across Earth's history, there have been dozens, perhaps hundreds, of smaller die-offs regional collapses, global near misses, pulses of change moments where the planet could have turned another way. And through all of them, one thread stays unbroken. Life returns, but never quite the same. What's astonishing isn't just survival. It's what happens after. After the Ordovician collapse, new fish lineages rose jawed fish, faster swimmers, more versatile bodies. After the Devonian, the stage cleared for tetrapods 4-limbed vertebrates that would eventually crawl onto land. After the Permian, reptiles rose into dominance, their bodies better suited to hotter, harsher climates. After the Cretaceous, mammals once small and mostly nocturnal expanded into daylight and diversity. The age of mammals was not preordained. It was an accident of survival. And that pattern disaster, followed by opportunity, is written across evolution's great leaps. The first eukaryotes, the first shells, the first eyes, limbs, wings, flowers, feathers. Often the breakthroughs come after the shakeups. Not because extinction is kind, but because extinction creates vacancy. It opens niches. When a predator disappears, prey expands. When reefs collapse, new reef builders move in. When forests fall, grasses spread. Survivors adapt, radiate, experiment, and the tree of life branches in directions it could not have taken before. You can see it in the fossil record, a lull, a silence, then a bloom new forms, unfamiliar and strange, but undeniably alive. There's something deeply human in that idea, that from loss, something unexpected can grow. That destruction isn't the end of the story, only the turning of a page, but the cost is always high. Mass extinctions are not tidy. They leave behind shattered systems and empty landscapes. Recovery takes millions of years. Some branches of life never return. Trilobites never came back. Rugose corals vanished. Ammonites gone. The great flying reptiles erased. Evolution doesn't rewind. It writes new lines. And as we face our own moment of planetary stress, the parallels become difficult to ignore. Carbon dioxide is rising faster than in many known ancient events. Species are disappearing at rates that echo past collapses. Coral reefs bleach. Rainforests burn. Glaciers thin. Sea levels creep. Oceans warm and acidify. We know these signs because we've read them in stone. Earth has been here before. Not with satellites and cities, but with carbon spikes, warming seas, and oxygen-starved waters. We know what tends to follow not from theory alone, but from history. And yet, this time is different, because this time, we know it's happening. This time, we have instruments that can read the sky's chemistry. We have ice cores that hold bubbles of ancient air. We have models that can test feedback loops before they fully trigger. We have the ability to choose a different slope. It's unsettling to realize that in this story, the asteroid is us. But also maybe the answer is too. Because if Earth teaches anything, it's that the shape of change matters. Its speed, its triggers, its buffers. Life survived past extinctions not by refusing to change, but by adapting, shifting, finding new strategies in a world that no longer matched the old rules. And if we are part of life, not separate from it, not above it, but braided into it, then we must adapt as well. Our ancestors did. They outlasted droughts. They crossed ice bridges. They survived eruptions that darkened skies and winters that lasted too long. They didn't only endure, they innovated. Language, fire, farming, storytelling. Now our challenge isn't to survive an extinction, it's to prevent one. Or at least soften the fall, break the cascade before it completes its loop. To learn from a planet that has given us every clue, if only we'll listen. In the long story of Earth, humans arrive late. Not in the last chapter, but in the last paragraph. The final sentence trailing behind billions of years of tectonic drama and biochemical invention. We showed up to a planet already rich with stories. And from the moment we began really noticing, we tried to understand what came before. Maybe it began with a rock that looked out of place, a shell found inland, a strange shape in stone, something that didn't belong, or rather, something that once belonged to a world that no longer existed, a fossil. Long before radiometric dating, before plate tectonics, before atmospheric models, people found teeth the size of fists and bones curved like serpents through the ground. They imagined dragons, giants, lost worlds, and in a way, they weren't wrong. They were touching the edge of a truth they didn't yet have words for. The ground beneath them held memory. Slowly, over centuries, a language formed. In the 17th century, a Danish scientist named Nicholas Steno noticed something simple and profound. Layers of rock are deposited over time, oldest at the bottom and youngest at the top unless disturbed. This principle of superposition became a cornerstone of geology. It meant Earth could be read like a book. Not all at once, not always cleanly, but line by line, layer by layer. Then came James Hutton in 18th century Scotland, walking craggy coastlines and riverbanks, staring at tilted strata and asking how they got that way. Where others saw disorder, Hutton saw deep time. He realized rocks could be eroded, buried, melted, lifted again, a cycle without end. In 1788 at Siccar Point, where vertical layers of ancient rock meet horizontal layers above them, he uttered a phrase that still chills the spine of anyone who has ever tried to hold deep time in their mind. No vestige of a beginning, no prospect of an end. It was radical. Earth wasn't merely thousands of years old. It was vast beyond ordinary imagination. Time enough for mountains to rise and fall, oceans to appear and vanish, species to bloom and disappear, without ever meeting a human eye. And if time was that vast, how much had we missed? And if time was that vast, how much had we missed? As the 19th century unfolded, curiosity bloomed into something almost feverish. Fossil hunters scoured cliffs and quarries, their hands stained with chalk and shale, their pockets heavy with fragments of worlds that had no living counterpart. Mary Anning, a self-taught fossil collector on the coast of Lyme Regis in England, pulled ichthyosaurs and plesiosaurs from Jurassic sea cliffs creatures that proved the Earth had once been inhabited by forms so strange they felt like myth, except they were real enough to chip from stone. Her work, often overlooked in her lifetime, would later reshape paleontology and the human imagination of deep history. At the same time, rocks began speaking in a new language: chemistry. Scientists discovered that some elements are unstable and that instability is a kind of clock. Uranium becomes lead, potassium becomes argon. These changes happen at predictable rates, indifferent to weather and war and human calendars. With careful measurement, geologists began assigning dates not as guesses, but as numbers. Millions, hundreds of millions, billions. The scale of Earth's history snapped into focus, not as a fog, but as a timeline with edges you could trace. And with those numbers came context. The Cambrian explosion around 540 million years ago, the end Permian extinction about 252 million, the asteroid impact at 66 million. Suddenly, deep time wasn't just deep, it was structured. Charles Lyell, with his principles of geology, argued that the processes shaping Earth today, erosion, sedimentation, volcanism, were the same ones that shaped it in the past. Uniformitarianism, a simple idea that became a kind of time machine. If you understood rivers and cliffs now, you could imagine their ancient ancestors working with the same quiet persistence. Darwin carried Lyell's book aboard the Beagle. He used its ideas as scaffolding for evolution because evolution, like geology, needs time. Not a little time. Time enough. Geology and biology began to interlace, and the planet's story started to feel like a single narrative rather than separate chapters filed in different drawers. Then came the 20th century and a revolution that changed everything, not with a single dramatic discovery, but with a gradual unlocking of a secret Earth had been keeping in plain sight: plate tectonics. For centuries, people noticed the fit of continents South America and Africa seeming to nestle together like puzzle pieces separated by a seam of ocean. But noticing isn't the same as explaining. It wasn't until scientists studied the seafloor, mapped ridges and trenches, and measured magnetic signatures locked into basalt that the truth became unavoidable. Earth's crust is broken into plates. They move, they drift, they collide, they pull apart. Mountains rise where plates collide. Volcanoes flare where plates dive beneath one another. New crust forms at mid-ocean ridges, spreading outward like slow-growing skin. Suddenly, so many mysteries fell into place at once. Why earthquakes cluster along certain lines, why fossils of the same species appear on distant continents, why mountain ranges curve like frozen waves. The Earth was alive in a new way, not only in its creatures, but in its very surface. And with that knowledge came a new generation of seekers, people who learned to listen not only to stone, but to the thin seams between layers where history turns. In the 1960s, on a hillside in Italy, a geologist named Walter Alvarez studied a peculiar layer of clay. It was thin, only a few centimeters, but it marked a boundary between ages. Below it, Cretaceous fossils were abundant, ammonites, the signs of a rich marine world. Above it, they were gone. A quiet disappearance. What happened in that thin layer? With the help of his father, a Nobel Prize-winning physicist, Alvarez analyzed the clay for rare elements. What they found was startling. An unusually high concentration of iridium, a metal, rare in Earth's crust but common in asteroids. This clay wasn't only a marker of time, it was a signature, a scar. The impact theory of the dinosaur extinction was born not from a crater you could stand inside, but from a thin seam of Italian rock. Soon that same iridium spike was found worldwide, the same silent boundary, and eventually scientists identified the crater buried beneath the Yucatan Peninsula Chicxulub, a circular wound more than 180 kilometers wide. A story that once sounded like science fiction became geology, became history. Stories like this are everywhere, if you know how to look. In South Africa, in the Barberton Greenstone Belt, geologists hike among some of the oldest rocks on the planet, more than 3.5 billion years old. Weathered, folded, not dramatic to an untrained eye, but inside them are chemical signatures of early oceans, layers rich in iron, hints of microbial mats. Some researchers even argue they preserve raindrop imprints, tiny dents left when ancient showers struck warm volcanic ash. Imagine that. A moment of weather pressed into stone and carried forward for billions of years. In Western Australia, again, tiny zircon crystals no larger than grains of sand sit embedded in younger rock. They are the oldest known pieces of Earth's crust, over 4.4 billion years old. Inside them, isotopic signatures suggest liquid water existed on Earth astonishingly early, perhaps just 150 million years after formation. That discovery didn't arrive with a trumpet blast. It arrived by patience, by isotope ratios measured again and again until the numbers held. The story of Earth isn't only collisions and extinctions, it's quiet persistence. Scientists kneeling in dirt, squinting at specks, asking questions no one has asked in quite the same way before. And sometimes those questions take a lifetime. In the Canadian Arctic, paleontologists dig into frozen ground for clues about ancient climates, pollen grains, insect wings, spores sealed in permafrost. From these fragments, we learn how ecosystems responded to past warmings and coolings, how forests migrated, how ice expanded and retreated. In Greenland, glaciologists drill deep ice cores and pull up cylinders that read like diaries. Each layer captures a year. Dust from deserts, ash from volcanoes, bubbles of ancient air. From these, we learn how carbon dioxide has waxed and waned, how temperatures have swung, how quickly the planet can shift once it crosses a threshold. In deep oceans, marine geologists use remotely operated vehicles to map hydrothermal vents, the same kind of environments where life may have begun. They collect microbes that feed on sulfur and survive without sunlight, organisms that live by chemistry alone. Their enzymes, strange, resilient hint at new medicines, new industrial processes, and perhaps clues about what life could look like elsewhere in the universe. In deserts, planetary geologists study dried lake beds and dust devils, not only for what they reveal about Earth, but for what they might tell us about Mars. Many tools we use to decode Earth's past now guide our search for ancient environments on other worlds. The Earth, in all its chaos, remains our only template. And behind every sample, every graph, every peer-reviewed paper, there is a person, often sunburned, often sleep-deprived, often uncertain. Science is not a straight climb from question to answer. It loops, it doubles back, it gets lost in detail and error and doubt. It argues, it revises, and then, sometimes, it emerges blinking into clarity. One of the most important revolutions in Earth science came from something that sounds almost too small to matter: the magnetic orientation of tiny crystals in basalt. In the mid-20th century, scientists mapping the seafloor noticed strange policey bands of rock with reversed magnetic polarity mirrored on either side of mid-ocean ridges. It was as if the ocean floor carried a barcode. That barcode meant new crust was being created at ridges and spreading outward, pushing continents apart. Quiet, data-just magnetism confirmed plate tectonics and rewrote our understanding of earthquakes, mountains, oceans, and the shape of the planet itself. And it did not come from one eureka moment. It came from hundreds of scientists, ships braving storms, instruments bobbing in dark water, notes scribbled in logbooks, progress pulled slowly from the deep. This is the rhythm of discovery. Some of the most important work is not glamorous. It's sorting fossils the size of rice grains. It's measuring carbon content for the 5th time. It's revisiting the same cliff face year after year, because one layer refuses to behave. And sometimes a mystery sits unanswered for decades, not because no one cares, but because the tools don't exist yet. Technology must catch up. Funding, insight, and then one day, a new method, a new satellite, a new algorithm, and an old question flickers to life again. There is a kind of magic in that, because geology, like astronomy and biology, isn't only about rocks or stars or species. It's about wonder, about patience, about returning to the same question again and again, hoping it will answer differently this time. And in that sense, scientists are storytellers. They take the raw material of earth ash, ice, iron, fossils, and weave it into narrative. They explain how continents moved, how creatures vanished, how skies changed. They bring clarity to chaos. They make meaning from mineral. And perhaps most importantly, they remind us that Earth's story is still unfolding. We are not only readers of this tale now, we are part of it. Our cities, our emissions, our choices. We have become a geologic force. And future geologists, 100, 1,000, 10,000 years from now, will dig through our layers. They will find our plastic, our soot, our bones. They will ask, as we ask of ancient strata, what happened here? And maybe they'll ask something else too. Who were these people? What did they understand? What did they change? And what, in the end, did they leave behind? If stories are the soul of science, then data is its breath. And in the story of Earth billions of years long, the data is buried deep, often invisible, sometimes microscopic, and always waiting. This is where the deep science dive begins. Not with cinematic explosions, but with quiet precision. The math behind the metaphor, the chemistry inside the stone. And it begins with the atom. And it begins with the atom specifically, the unstable ones. On a quiet bench in a geochemistry lab, a tiny mineral sample, perhaps zircon, no larger than a grain of sand, is prepared for analysis. It has been ground, polished, washed, etched. Inside it, locked into a crystalline lattice, are atoms of uranium. Uranium doesn't stay uranium forever. Its nucleus is unstable. Over time, it decays, step by step, into lead predictably, reliably, at a pace unaffected by heat, pressure, or the passing moods of the world above. And by measuring how much uranium remains and how much lead has formed, scientists calculate how long that mineral has existed. This is radiometric dating. Not one method, but a family of clocks tuned to different ages and different materials. Uranium-lead, potassium-argon, rubidium-strontium, carbon-14. Each has its own range, its own strengths, its own careful rituals. Carbon-14 is ideal for dating once living things, bones, wood, cloth, charcoal up to around 50,000 years. Beyond that, the signal fades, an echo lost in a canyon. For rocks and meteorites and the deep time of Earth itself, other isotopes take the stage. Uranium-lead dating reaches back billions of years. It's how we know the ages of the oldest minerals on the planet. These methods are not simple. They demand clean labs, sensitive instruments, careful calibration. Contamination can turn meaning into noise. A fingerprint, a fleck of dust, a tiny bubble in resin, small mistakes can distort big timelines. But when it works, it gives us more than numbers. It gives us context. Those 4.4 billion-year-old zircons from Australia, their isotope ratios suggest not only age, but temperature. From them, we infer the presence of liquid water. We learn about early crust and early oceans. This is the quiet beauty of isotope geochemistry. It reads not only the clock, but the climate. Oxygen isotopes can reveal temperature. Lighter and heavier oxygen atoms behave slightly differently during evaporation and condensation. By measuring the ratio of oxygen-16 to oxygen-18 in ice cores, shells, or minerals, Scientists can reconstruct ancient temperatures year by year in some records, layer by layer, going back hundreds of thousands of years. Carbon isotopes tell a different story. Carbon-12 is more common, and life tends to prefer it. Plants and plankton and animals incorporate more carbon-12 than carbon-13. So when life blooms, the ratio shifts one way. When life collapses, the ratio can swing sharply in the other direction. It's like a pulse monitor pressed against the biosphere. A sudden drop can signal extinction. A rebound can hint at recovery. Sulfur isotopes speak in their own accent, especially during low oxygen times. When sulfur-cycling bacteria dominate, they leave isotopic signatures that tell of anoxic oceans, microbial blooms, and skies that may have smelled faintly of chemistry and storm. Taken together, these isotopes are threads woven into rock. Read carefully, they reveal not only when something happened, but under what conditions. Not only what happened, but how. But to understand ancient life, chemistry isn't enough. We also need fossils. And fossils, real fossils, are far more varied and fragile than museum skeletons suggest. There are the obvious ones: bones, teeth, shells, hard parts that resist decay and mineralize over time, trilobites, ammonites, dinosaur femurs, mammoth tusks. The kinds of objects that feel sturdy, almost permanent, until you remember they survived by luck and burial and the right chemistry at the right moment. But there are also softer fossils, more ghost-like. Impressions in mud, leaves pressed into silt, microbial mats turned to stone, tracks and burrows, a footprint held in hardened sediment, coprolite's fossil dung telling you not only who lived, but what they ate. Even the faint shadow of a jellyfish, trapped in a single quiet moment and carried forward through time. In places like the Burgess Shale in Canada, paleontologists have uncovered entire Cambrian communities preserved in exquisite detail, soft tissues included, creatures with no modern analog, bodies that look like experiments, as if evolution was trying on shapes. These fossils show not only who lived, but how they lived, what they ate, how they moved, how ecosystems were structured at the dawn of complex animal life. In China's Yunnan province, and in Germany's Solnhofen limestone, fossils preserve details so fine they border on intimate. Feather structures, soft body outlines, sometimes even microscopic pigment structures called melanosomes that hint at colors and patterns, ancient hues reconstructed from tiny shapes in stone. Paleobiology is no longer only a catalog of species. It's an attempt to rebuild ecosystems, food webs, predator-prey dynamics, evolutionary pressures, extinction pathways, and increasingly it overlaps with genetics, because sometimes history is written not in bones, but in living genomes. In the DNA of modern organisms, we find echoes of deep ancestry, genes shared across vast evolutionary distances, ancient toolkits used again and again. The genes that help embryos know where to grow limbs, arms, legs, wings, fins are variations on old instructions. Vestigial hips in whales, the patterns that shape beaks in birds, deep homologies that reveal how evolution edits rather than invents from scratch. Sometimes genomes also carry stranger signatures, horizontal gene transfer, genes that jumped across lineages, often through viruses. A patchwork of inheritance, bits of bacterial code in plants, viral fragments embedded in animal DNA, old accidents that became permanent features. The lines blur. Life is less a neat tree than a braided river. And at the oldest edges among extremophiles, archaea, thermophilic bacteria. Researchers hunt for clues to early life's adaptations. How did the first cells survive? What enzymes did they use? Were they born in vents, in clays, in ice, in warm mineral pools? These questions bleed naturally into astrobiology because when you start asking how life begins, you start wondering where else it could. To explore those beginnings, scientists recreate ancient conditions. They build simulation chambers. They replicate hydrothermal vents. They mix gases under UV light in glass domes. They test whether RNA can self-replicate, whether lipid membranes can assemble in brine, whether amino acids can survive radiation. Some push farther still, sending instruments to Mars, dreaming toward Europa and Enceladus, peering at exoplanet atmospheres for biosignatures, oxygen, methane, water vapor spectral fingerprints that might hint at life breathing somewhere beyond our night sky. And through all of it, Earth remains the only working example, our only template, the only planet we can dissect without leaving home. If rocks and isotopes tell us where we've been, then models, beautiful, strange mathematical models, help us understand motion, how we got there, and where we might be going. Because even the deepest fossil bed is only a slice, a moment. What we often want is change over time. The slow dance of continents, the rise and fall of sea levels, the growth and retreat of ice. We want to rewind the planet, to watch it breathe. So we build simulations. Climate models are among the most complex tools humans have made. They don't only simulate weather, they simulate Earth systems, atmospheric circulation, ocean currents, cloud formation, carbon cycles, glacial advance, soil moisture, volcanic emissions, solar variation, sometimes vegetation growth. They are built from physics, fluid dynamics, thermodynamics, radiative transfer, and layered with data. Satellites, ice cores, tree rings, sediment cores, fossil pollen, coral bands, isotope ratios. Some run on supercomputers the size of buildings. Others are simplified on purpose, built to test one variable at a time. What happens if volcanic aerosols increase? What happens if ice sheets collapse? What happens if sunlight distribution shifts just a little? Because Earth's orbit wobbles, quietly, predictably, over long spans. These are Milankovitch cycles, eccentricity, obliquity, precession, subtle changes in the shape of Earth's orbit, the tilt of its axis, and the slow wobble of that tilt. Over tens of thousands to hundreds of thousands of years, these cycles change how sunlight is distributed, and that helps trigger ice ages and warm interglacials. We see the rhythm in the data, glacial cycles matching orbital patterns like footsteps following a metronome. And when researchers plug those cycles into models, the results line up. Ice grows and shrinks. Sea levels rise and fall. Deserts advance and retreat. It's like watching the planet inhale and exhale in slow motion. Some models reach farther back still, into deep time reconstructing Paleozoic and Mesozoic worlds with different coastlines, different mountains, different oxygen levels. They ask, what was the weather like when trilobites ruled the seas? When coal swamps stretched under humid skies? When pterosaurs rode warm air above shallow tropical oceans? To do that, researchers use paleogeographic reconstructions maps of ancient continents built from tectonic evidence, fossil distributions, and magnetic signatures locked in rock. They feed these maps into models, adjust the atmosphere to match ancient chemistry, and then they watch the simulated world move. Rains over Gondwana, winds across the Tethys, monsoons battering shorelines that no longer exist. These aren't mere guesses, they're experiments, and they can be tested against evidence. Sediment types, fossil distributions, oxygen isotopes, conodont chemistry, growth rings in fossil wood. Sometimes the models even surprise us. They show, for instance, that the Sahara was not always a desert. Just 6,000 years ago, it was greener, a land of lakes and grasslands, driven by slight changes in orbital tilt that strengthened monsoons. As the orbit shifted, rains receded, lakes dried, and the desert returned. A reminder that even vast landscapes can change under subtle celestial nudges. Models also help us understand extinctions. Why did the end Permian hit the ocean so brutally? Simulations suggest ocean temperatures rose, oxygen fell, circulation slowed, and the sea became hot and breathless. Why did the asteroid at Chicxulub cause such widespread collapse? Not only the impact, but sulfur aerosols in the stratosphere blocking sunlight, halting photosynthesis, unraveling food webs. And these models aren't only about the past. The same physics, the same equations are used to model our future climate. Past events like the Paleocene-Eocene thermal maximum saw temperatures rise dramatically over thousands of years. Today we are driving comparable shifts in centuries or less. The speed is the danger. So scientists run scenarios. High emissions, low emissions, rapid decarbonization, business as usual. Each paints a different possible world. In some, the Amazon dries towards savanna. The Arctic becomes seasonally ice-free. Coastal cities flood. Rain patterns shift. Extreme heat spreads. In others, with strong action, the curve bends, the damage slows, ecosystems have space to adapt, and the future narrows back toward balance. No model claims certainty. They are tools, not oracles. But they give something precious, foresight. And modeling doesn't stop at the surface. Scientists model Earth's interior, how heat moves through the mantle, how plumes rise, how plates interact. They model earthquakes, magma chambers, the growth of continental crust. They model the magnetic field and its reversals. They model impacts, shockwaves, ejecta, recovery times. They model the origin of the moon, testing different angles and speeds for Theia, watching debris swirl and gather. They even model abiogenesis, the origin of life using chemistry and probability and simulation to test which molecules might form under which conditions and how long it might take for order to emerge from chaos. Because the question is never only what happened, it's how. How does a planet evolve? How do climates tip? How do oceans change? How does the world rebuild? And in that asking, science becomes something more than knowledge. It becomes a way of imagining what Earth felt like. Winds before forests, oceans before fish, rain on newborn rock. Science is an act of listening. And when we dive into isotopes and genomes and equations and code, we are not moving away from wonder. We are circling closer to it. Closer to the moment the first cell divided. Closer to the breath of a mammoth in snow. Closer to rain falling on a continent that had never been named. Closer, perhaps, to understanding our place in the unfolding story, not as masters, not as passengers, but as part of the same long, patient system. The same story still turning, the same story still turning. When the world ends, it rarely ends all at once. Not even in the face of fire or ice or silence. Mass extinction is not a door slammed shut, but a long, aching quiet, the kind that spreads unevenly, in ripples and delays. A forest doesn't vanish overnight. It thins. It weakens. It forgets how to return in spring. An ocean doesn't die with a single bloom. It gasps layer by layer until light no longer reaches what it used to. And just as collapse is slow, recovery is slow too. Because evolution doesn't rebuild what was lost. It builds what can survive next. After the asteroid struck 66 million years ago, dinosaurs did not vanish in a single moment across the whole planet. Some died immediately, vaporized near the impact, crushed in the violence of shockwaves, swallowed by tsunamis, burned in fires. But many, perhaps most, died in what followed. Months and years of darkness, cold, poisoned air, broken food chains. Starvation is not cinematic. It is attrition. It is the long unraveling of a world that no longer makes sense. In the oceans, the collapse began at the base. Planktonic algae, the tiny photosynthesizers that feed so much of marine life, fell away when sunlight failed. Without them, filter feeders starved. Predators followed. Reefs became graveyards. Ammonites vanished forever. Mosasaurs, plesiosaurs. Entire lineages erased, not with a scream, but with a silence that thickened year after year. And yet, even in the ashes, something stirred. The survivors were often small, adaptable, generalists. Mammals hiding in burrows, birds sheltering where they could, fish with wide diets, scavengers and opportunists, creatures that could live in the cracks of a shattered system. Over millions of years, those survivors changed. Forests returned. Not the same species, not the same rhythms, but green nonetheless. Mammals grew larger and tried new shapes. Primates moved into regrown canopies. Whales, once landbound, returned to the sea. Grasses spread, hoofed animals ran. and eventually under the African sun. One lineage of apes began to walk upright more often than not. But recovery was not fast. It took roughly 10 million years for biodiversity to climb back toward pre-extinction levels. 10 million years of trial and divergence and reinvention. 10 million years of the planet adjusting to new rules, different climates, different coastlines, different chemistries in the air and water. After the end Permian extinction, recovery took longer still. Ecosystems were shattered to their roots. Reef communities, for example, took on the order of tens of millions of years, in some views, nearly 100 million, to fully regain their former richness. And what returned wasn't a rewind. New architects took over. Different reef builders, different relationships. Reinvention, not return. Sometimes recovery doesn't mean going back. It means becoming something else. After the Ordovician extinction, marine ecosystems rebuilt with new kinds of complexity. More active swimmers, new predators, more defensive shells. After the Devonian collapse, plants pushed further onto land. Deep-rooted trees rose, soils thickened, rivers carried different chemistry. The land became more hospitable, and vertebrates began inching away from water lungs replacing gills, limbs bearing weight. The first steps toward forests filled with animal sound. Long recoveries reveal something sobering and something hopeful. Life is resilient, yes, but it is also slow. It can reroute, adapt, diversify, but it needs time. And the cost of losing a lineage is permanent. Evolution doesn't keep backup copies. It keeps only what survives. In the wake of destruction, ecosystems rarely regrow symmetrically. Some regions rebound faster off in the tropics, where energy and sunlight are abundant. Others lag. Biodiversity rises not as a smooth curve, but in pulses, surges of innovation, plateaus, setbacks, then new surges. You can almost feel it like breath. Expand, pause, contract, expand, again. And as life recovers, geology continues its patient work. Carbon once held in living bodies returns to rock chalk cliffs, coral reefs, coal seams, limestone shelves. Rivers find new channels. Mountains erode into plains. Continents drift a little farther apart. The skin of Earth reshapes itself to match the new world that life is building. This becomes especially clear when you remember that oxygenation, the rise of oxygen in the atmosphere, was not a single clean event. It came in pulses. The first major oxygenation began over 2 billion years ago, driven by cyanobacteria exhaling oxygen into an unprepared world. But oxygen didn't climb smoothly to modern levels. It fluctuated, spiked and dipped, climbed and stalled. It took nearly 2 billion years more before atmospheric oxygen reached something like today's concentration, enough to support large bodies, high metabolisms, brains. In that long gap, Earth was experimenting. Sometimes oxygen supported life. Sometimes it burned it away through oxidation and chemistry that punished the unadapted. Life responded by evolving new enzymes, new metabolisms, new ways of protecting delicate cellular machinery. Mitochondria. Those little power plants inside our cells are part of that long adaptation to oxygen. Muscles, movement, complexity. All of it relies on energy, and energy reshaped what life could dare to become. Recovery is not separate from climate. It is entwined with it. After extinctions, atmospheric composition shifts. Greenhouse gases rise or fall. Methane blooms and fades. Carbon cycles rebalance. Volcanic pulses begin or taper. Ocean oxygen returns slowly, often in fits and starts. The new normal takes time to establish, and that new balance shapes rainfall, temperature, ocean chemistry, and the distribution of plants and animals. Then the recovering biosphere reshapes climate again. Forests draw down carbon. Algae fix nutrients. Reefs alter local waters. The planet is not a stage where life performs while geology watches. Earth is a partner, a co-author. Rock, air, water, and life are constantly revising each other. This is where the story turns uncomfortably toward us. We live in the Cenozoic, the era that followed the dinosaur extinction, an era of mammal expansion, Grasslands, ice ages, mountain uplift, shifting deserts, sea levels that rose and fell by more than 100 meters again and again. And within that restless era, one species began shaping stone into tools, painting caves, burying the dead, building stories to hold time and language. Us. We are not separate from Earth's recoveries. We are made from them. Our bodies carry ancient blueprints, vertebrate plans drawn long before mammals existed. Our lungs are possible because oxygen persisted. Our blood carries iron, a memory of a molten core and rusted seas. Our sleep and tides still answer the moon. And now, we are changing the system that made us. Human time is fast. That's part of our power and our danger. Forests cut down in decades take centuries to return, if they return. Coral reefs bleached in a few summers may require millennia to rebuild, and only if conditions stabilize. Species lost do not reappear. Rivers dammed and rerouted reshape whole landscapes. The scars remain longer than the politics that created them. And yet, even within our short span, we can see hints of how quickly systems respond when pressure changes. In Yellowstone, the return of wolves rewrote the landscape, not metaphorically, literally. Wolves changed the behavior of deer. Deer browsed less in certain areas. Vegetation recovered along riverbanks. Roots stabilized soil. Erosion slowed. Rivers altered their channels. A predator returned, and the shape of water changed. A reminder that ecosystems are not collections of parts. They are relationships. Change one relationship, and the whole web shivers. This is the hopeful part. Life does not forget how to rebuild, but it needs time, space, and sometimes silence. The recovery from past extinctions tells us that 10 million years is fast. 30 million is ordinary. 100 million is not unusual. By that scale, human civilization has barely existed at all. So the question becomes not whether Earth will recover, Earth will endure, but what kind of world we are shaping for whatever comes next. Recovery will happen. The biosphere will find a way. But what it becomes depends on what survives, what seeds remain in soil and sea and gene pools. In that sense, our footprint is not only carbon, it is evolutionary. We are not the first life form to change the planet. Cyanobacteria changed it with oxygen. Plants changed it with roots and soils. Microbes changed it with chemistry. But we are the first species to know we are doing it, to measure it in parts per million, to watch graphs rise like tides, to argue about futures that haven't happened yet. And knowledge is a strange burden, because it makes responsibility possible. Not control Earth is too vast for control, but choice. Not perfect solutions, but direction. We do not need to solve the planet. Earth is not a problem. It is a partner. The planet doesn't need saving in the way a fragile object needs saving. It needs stability, respect, space to adapt. It needs time, and time is what we still have for now. Stand outside sometime if you can, barefoot. Feel the ground's quiet solidity. Notice how easily we take it for granted, this stable surface under our lives. Feel the air on your skin, the sun's warmth even through your eyelids. It's easy to forget that this arrangement, the chemistry, the climate, the rhythms, is temporary. It wasn't always this way. It won't always be. Earth has frozen solid. It has melted down toward magma. It has been struck, drowned, burned, and rebuilt. 5 times life nearly vanished. 5 times the world emptied its shelves and rewrote its living inventory. And each time, slowly, shakily, life returned, never in quite the same shape. And now we are inside a new shift. But this time, it isn't an asteroid. It isn't a flood basalt province. It isn't the wobble of an orbit. This time, the pressure comes from within, from us fire drawn from stone, carbon pulled from the bones of ancient swamps and released into the sky, forests felled, oceans warmed, species pushed into corners. This time, We are the trigger, and this time, we are aware. That may be the most astonishing fact of all. Not the damage, though it is vast, but the consciousness of it. No trilobite worried about extinction, no fern mourned a Devonian die-off. But we measure, we model, we debate, we hope. And hope, fragile as it is, changes the story because it makes action possible. When you learn the depth of time, the long arc of cause and effect, the slow stitching of ecosystems, you begin to see yourself differently. Not separate, but embedded. Not a visitor, but a continuation. We are made of earth atom by atom. The calcium in our bones forged in dying stars. The oxygen in our lungs gifted by ancient microbes. The iron in our blood a relic of planetary differentiation. We are geology, animated, biology, thinking, chemistry, dreaming. And yet, for all our cleverness, we are also clumsy. We push too hard, too fast, trusting the planet to absorb our urgency. Sometimes it does. Rain still falls, leaves still return. But the signs are growing harder to ignore. Winters that don't quite freeze, rivers that no longer reach the sea, glaciers thin to glass, reefs pale as ghosts, migrations misaligned, seasons confused. The world is whispering back, and its voice is strained. The world is whispering back, and its voice is strained. We have entered what many scientists call the Anthropocene, a proposed new epoch marked not by an asteroid or an ice sheet, but by human activity. An age defined by plastics in the deep sea, soot trapped in glacier cores, nitrogen fertilizers reshaping soils, and the bones of domestic animals outweighing the bodies of wild mammals. And unlike the epochs before it, this one knows its own name. That awareness is both burden and beacon. Because if we are capable of altering the planet, its atmosphere, its oceans, its rhythms, then we are also capable of choosing how we alter it. Not perfect control, not a rewind button, but direction. The Earth reminds us again and again that change itself isn't the enemy. Some of its most breathtaking moments came after upheaval. Forest from ash, reef from ruin, flight from extinction. The danger is speed. When carbon levels shift slowly, ecosystems have time to migrate and adapt. Corals can move their ranges, forests can inch uphill, species can adjust their breeding seasons, their diets, their strategies. But when change comes faster than the background rhythm of evolution, mismatches appear. Tipping points loom, and the window narrows. Wide enough for hope, still, but narrowing. We can slow the burn, bend the curve, make room for recovery. We can restore wetlands, protect forests, cut emissions, design cities that don't treat the atmosphere like an invisible landfill. We can do the unglamorous work of stability. We can listen to the past, not as prophecy, but as guidance. Because Earth has already taught us what imbalance costs and how long recovery takes. And memory isn't only for scientists. Memory lives in language, in the names we give rivers and mountains and winds, in how farmers read clouds, in the way children notice the moon. It lives in ceremony, in song, in stillness. It lives in stories, because stories are how human beings carry time without having to hold every number. Maybe that is where some of the answer lives too. Not in a single solution, but in remembering what kind of animal we are. We are pattern makers. We are tool users. We are caretakers when we choose to be. We are descendants of survivors. Every one of us carries a lineage that passed through ice ages and deserts, through famine and fire. We are adapted for attention, for curiosity, for care. We are the species that stays up late wondering how the world began, and now, wondering what comes next. What kind of planet will we leave? What kind of ancestors will we be? We don't need to solve Earth. It isn't a puzzle to complete. It's a partner. It doesn't need saving like a fragile artifact. It needs space, stability, respect. It needs us to remember how to live inside time, not only in hours and work weeks, but in seasons and centuries, in the slow patience that ecosystems require. This isn't only a bedtime story, though I know the rhythm can soothe. It's a wakefulness story, a reminder that our place on Earth is not fixed. It is shaped by our choices, what we grow, what we protect, what we consume, what we release, what we refuse to lose. We are not the conclusion of Earth's story. We are a turning point. And maybe, just maybe, we are the first species to write the next chapter with full awareness of what came before and what could still come after. So here we are, at the end of a very long beginning. We've drifted through magma and microbes, oceans and orbits, collisions and recoveries. We stood beside scientists tracing ash through stone. We listened to atoms ticking softly in the dark. We watched continents drift past each other like slow, sleeping whales. We saw life fall and return. And through it all, Earth turned quietly, patiently, endlessly. And so have you. Thank you for spending this time with me, here in Echoes of the Forgotten Earth. Whether you're still fully awake or somewhere between thought and dream, where metaphors melt and time gets soft around the edges. Thank you for listening, for wondering, for being part of this small shared story. If this voice and this rhythm helped you unwind, helped you feel a little more connected to the ground beneath you, I invite you to join me again. You can like, subscribe, leave a thought below. Your voice matters here. And if there's a story you'd like to hear, something about the deep ocean, the language of trees, the birth of mountains, or the long memory of ice, tell me. This space exists not to lecture, but to wonder alongside you. Next time we might explore the deep sea and its black gardens of vents, or the way forests talk through fungi, or what happens to a mountain after it's born, how it erodes, how it becomes soil, how it becomes bread. But for now, let the questions fade. Let the noise soften. Let the rhythm of this planet, ancient, beautiful, unfinished, hold you. Good night from Echoes of the Forgotten Earth. And wherever you are in time, sleep well.